crossroads stretched before Jon Snow like the branching paths of his entire life, each direction promising different forms of exile from the only home he has ever known. The Night's Watch recruiter disappears over the distant hill, his black cloak already fading into the gray winter morning, while behind him, Winterfell's towers rise against clouds heavy with unspoken accusations. Jon's hand tightens on his horse's reins as he calculates the weight of staying against the certainty of Catelyn Stark's cold reception awaiting his return. The mathematics of belonging have never favored bastards. Jon understands this as clearly as he understands the tactical disadvantages of fighting uphill or attacking without adequate supplies. Yet, something in Ned's final words to him before the recruiter's arrival suggests possibilities that extend beyond the simple equation of legitimacy and exile. His father spoke of duty, yes, but also of choices that shape not merely individual destinies, but the fate of entire houses. The wind carries the scent of pine and approaching snow as Jon turns his mount toward Winterfell's gates. Each hoof beat against the frozen ground marks a deliberate rejection of the path that would have led him to the wall, to vows of celibacy and service to a crumbling institution that guards against threats most of the realm no longer believes exist. The guards nod as he passes beneath the portcullis, their faces revealing nothing of surprise at his return, though their eyes follow him with the careful attention men reserve for unexpected developments. Catelyn waits in the great hall like a chess piece, positioned to control key squares of the board. Her back remains straight as steel, her hands folded with the precision of someone who has spent years perfecting the art of noble composure. Yet Jon reads the tension in her shoulders as easily as he would read the formations of opposing armies. She does not look at him as he enters, but her awareness of his presence fills the space between them like the pressure that builds before thunderstorms. "You are still here," she observes, her voice carrying the flat neutrality of someone stating obvious facts about unpleasant weather. Jon stops 3 paces from where she stands, close enough for conversation, but distant enough to avoid the appearance of familiarity. "I am still here." The silence that follows stretches like the moment between arrow's release and target strike. Catelyn's calculation becomes visible in the slight tightening around her eyes as she processes the implications of his presence. A bastard who refuses exile represents a complication to the ordered succession she has spent years securing for her true-born children. "Your father is in his solar," she says finally. The words carry no warmth, but also no direct command to leave. Jon recognizes this as close to permission as he will ever receive from her. Ned looks up from his ledgers as Jon enters without knocking, a breach of protocol that in itself signals the weight of whatever conversation must follow. The Lord of Winterfell sets down his quill with the careful deliberation of someone preparing for negotiations whose outcomes cannot be predetermined. His gray eyes study Jon's face with the intensity he typically reserves for reports from his bannermen about movements along contested borders. "The Night's Watch rides north without you," Ned observes. "They ride north without me," Jon confirms, settling into the chair across from his father's desk without waiting for invitation. The gesture stakes territorial claims in a room where he has always existed as visitor rather than inhabitant. Ned's fingers drum once against the wooden surface between them. "Catelyn believes your presence here creates complications for your siblings' futures." the statement hangs in the air like a sword suspended above both their heads. Jon meets his father's gaze directly, allowing the silence to build pressure until it demands resolution through action rather than further words. "What would you have me do?" Jon asks finally. The question forces Ned into the role of decision-maker rather than mere observer of family dynamics. His weathered hands clasp together as he calculates possibilities that extend beyond the immediate household tensions, poisoning Winterfell's atmosphere. The Lord of Winterfell has built his reputation on decisions that prioritize duty over personal preference. Yet something in his expression suggests internal conflicts between competing loyalties. The North has need of capable men, Ned says slowly, each word weighted with implications that extend far beyond simple job placement. Men who understand loyalty, who can be trusted with difficult tasks, who care more about service than personal advancement. Jon leans forward slightly, recognizing the shift in his father's tone from paternal guidance toward something approaching political recruitment. The solar around them feels smaller suddenly, as if the conversation has drawn the walls closer together. "I would serve House Stark in whatever capacity you deem appropriate," Jon replies, the formality of his response acknowledging the formal nature of whatever arrangement Ned appears to be considering. Ned stands and moves to the window overlooking Winterfell's courtyard, where men practice at arms under the supervision of Ser Rodrik Cassel. His silence stretches long enough for Jon to catalog the various sounds of military preparation filtering up from below. Steel against steel, shouted commands, the solid thunk of arrows finding their targets. "There are precedents," Ned says finally, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who has spent considerable time researching historical examples. Lords who have legitimized capable bastards when circumstances required additional support for their houses. The words hit Jon with the force of cavalry charges he has only imagined in his most ambitious dreams. Legitimization represents more than legal recognition. It promises transformation from perpetual outsider into recognized member of the pack, from bastard Snow into acknowledged wolf. Yet, he forces himself to consider the tactical implications rather than surrendering immediately to the emotional appeal of belonging. What circumstances require such support now? Jon asks, though part of him fears the answer might reveal threats to House Stark that extend beyond mere family politics. Ned turns from the window, his expression grave with the weight of information that has clearly been troubling him for some time. Ravens have been arriving from a King's Landing with increasing frequency. Robert speaks of rebellion brewing in the east, of Targaryen pretenders gathering strength across the narrow sea. The realm may soon have need of every loyal sword it can muster. The implications cascade through Jon's understanding like stones starting avalanches. War means opportunity for advancement, but also terrible risks for those caught on losing sides. More immediately, it means Ned requires trusted subordinates capable of handling responsibilities that cannot be delegated to traditional household retainers. "You would make me Jon Stark," Jon says, testing the sound of the name against the reality of everything such recognition would mean. "I would make you my son-in-law as well as blood," Ned replies, the simple statement carrying revolutionary implications for everything Jon has understood about his place in the world. The North remembers Jon. It remembers loyalty, service, and capability, regardless of the circumstances of birth. What matters is what a man chooses to do with the opportunities he receives. Jon feels the weight of decision settling across his shoulders, like the ceremonial cloaks worn by newly made knights. Everything he has ever wanted lies within reach, yet accepting means binding himself to responsibilities whose scope he cannot yet fully comprehend. The solar around them fills with the kind of charged silence that precedes either triumph or disaster, depending entirely on choices made in the next few moments. Outside the window, snow begins to fall in earnest, each flake marking time's passage toward whatever future these words will create. Jon looks at his father, truly his father now, in ways that transcend blood alone, and prepares to speak words that will reshape not merely his own destiny, but the political landscape of the North itself, though neither of them yet understands how completely this single conversation will alter the balance of power when war finally comes to Westeros and the snow falling outside becomes heavier, accumulating on windowsills, while Jon measures his words with the same careful precision Ned has taught him to employ when fletching arrows or examining maps of contested territories. I accept whatever path you believe serves the North best, Jon says finally, though his voice carries undertones of uncertainty that reveal how thoroughly this conversation has upended every assumption he has carried about his future. But I need to understand what accepting means, what duties, what expectations, what enemies this choice might create. Ned nods with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student has asked precisely the right questions. First, training. Real training. Not just sword work and archery, though those continue. You need to understand northern politics, diplomacy, the intricate web of loyalties and obligations that bind our bannermen. You need to recognize which lords can be trusted completely, which require careful handling, and which harbor ambitions that could threaten Stark interests. He moves to his desk and retrieves a leather-bound ledger whose pages contain detailed assessments of every major northern house. Catelyn has already expressed concerns about this development. She believes legitimizing you creates unnecessary complications for Robb's eventual succession. These concerns are not unreasonable, politically speaking. Jon's stomach tightens as the implications become clear. Lady Catelyn has never hidden her resentment of his presence at Winterfell, but legitimization transforms that personal animosity into something approaching political opposition. Will she actively work against this decision? She will adapt. Ned replies with the kind of certainty that suggests extensive private discussions have already occurred on this subject. Catelyn understands duty as clearly as anyone in the North. Her first obligation is to House Stark's continued prosperity and security. If your legitimization serves those goals, she will support it regardless of personal feelings. But the transition will require careful management. Expectations must be clarified. Roles must be defined. The bannermen must understand that Robb remains the primary heir while you assume responsibilities that complement rather than compete with his position. The conversation continues through the evening as snow accumulates outside, transforming the familiar landscape of Winterfell into something ethereal and otherworldly. Ned outlines the intensive education that will occupy Jon's days. Mornings spent studying Northern law and precedent under Maester Luwin's guidance. Afternoons practicing diplomacy through carefully orchestrated interactions with visiting lords and their representatives. Evenings devoted to strategic thinking and tactical planning sessions that will prepare him for the complex decision-making required of Stark leadership. The scope proves daunting, yet Jon finds himself energized by challenges that promise to engage capabilities he has never been permitted to develop fully. 2 weeks later, a raven arrives carrying the official documentation of Jon's legitimization, bearing King Robert's seal in formal language that transforms a bastard into a trueborn son with all accompanying rights and privileges. The news spreads through Winterfell like fire through dry timber, generating reactions that range from genuine celebration among the small folk and guard to careful neutrality from household staff who understand the political implications too well to express opinions carelessly. The Bannerlords receive word through individual messages that emphasize continuity of leadership structure while acknowledging the expanded Stark succession. Lord Umber responds with characteristic bluntness. "Doesn't matter to me if the boy was born in a castle or a tavern. He fights well and thinks clearly. That's what the North needs." Mage Mormont's reply proves equally direct, but more politically astute. House Mormont recognizes Jon Snow's legitimization and pledges the same loyalty we have always shown House Stark. The North grows stronger when capable hands share the burden of leadership. Other responses arrive with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but none express open opposition to the king's decree. Catelyn's reaction manifests through careful silence rather than overt protest, though Jon notices increased tension during family meals and formal gatherings where his presence now carries different political weight. She fulfills her duties as Lady of Winterfell with impeccable correctness, but the warmth she shows Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon pointedly excludes him. Jon understands this represents significant progress compared to her previous hostility. Yet, the emotional distance remains a constant reminder of complexities that legitimization cannot resolve. Training intensifies as promised. Jon spends mornings studying legal precedents that govern Northern inheritance, trade agreements, and military obligations. Maester Luwin proves a demanding teacher who expects mastery of intricate details regarding bannerman relationships, historical grievances between houses, and the complex web of marriages that bind Northern families together across generations. Afternoons bring practical diplomacy lessons as Jon observes Ned's handling of various disputes and administrative challenges, learning to recognize the subtle signals that indicate whether negotiation will prove successful or whether firmer measures might be required. The education proves invaluable when King Robert's summons arrives, requesting Ned's service as Hand of the King. The message creates immediate upheaval throughout Winterfell as the implications become clear. Ned must travel south to King's Landing, leaving Northern administration in trusted hands while navigating the dangerous political currents of the capital. After extensive discussion with Catelyn and his advisors, Ned makes a decision that surprises everyone. Jon will accompany him south as part of the Stark retinue, gaining first-hand exposure to Southern politics that no amount of theoretical education could provide. The capital is a nest of vipers, Ned explains during their final preparation meeting. But you need to understand how power operates beyond the North. You need to see corruption, ambition, and manipulation in their purest forms. Most importantly, you need to learn how Northern honor and directness fare when confronted with Southern scheming. This education cannot be obtained from books alone. The journey south begins on a crisp morning when frost covers the ground and their breath creates small clouds in the cold air. Jon rides beside Ned, no longer relegated to the position of bastard trailing behind the main party, but taking his place as a legitimate member of the Stark household. The symbolic importance of this positioning is not lost on anyone in the retinue, particularly the guards and household staff who must recalibrate their understanding of hierarchy and protocol. Behind them, Winterfell shrinks into the distance, while ahead lies King's Landing with all its promises and perils. The royal capital proves everything Ned's warnings suggested, and worse. Jon witnesses corruption so casual and pervasive that northern lords would consider it grounds for immediate dismissal or exile. He observes courtiers who smile while plotting destruction, ministers who pocket gold intended for infrastructure improvements, and nobles who treat small folk suffering as entertainment rather than responsibility requiring action. Most disturbing is how quickly otherwise honorable men adapt to these conditions, compromising principles incrementally until they become indistinguishable from the corruption they once opposed. Power without accountability creates monsters. Ned observes quietly one evening after a particularly disturbing council session where funds designated for road repairs were quietly redirected to finance a royal feast. The North maintains different standards because our people suffer directly when we fail them. Here, consequences can be avoided through wealth, connections, or simply geographic distance from problems created by poor decisions. Jon absorbs these lessons while navigating his own challenges as the legitimized bastard of a great house, suddenly thrust into the most complex political environment in Westeros. Some courtiers treat him with careful respect, uncertain how much influence he might eventually wield. Others dismiss him as irrelevant, assuming legitimization changes nothing meaningful about his ultimate prospects. A few demonstrate genuine interest in cultivating potential future relationships, recognizing that northern politics may eventually offer opportunities for advancement or alliance that could prove valuable. The most dangerous reactions come from those who view Jon's legitimization as a threat to their own positions or plans. Whispered conversations in hallways suggest that certain factions consider the Stark succession too stable for their purposes, and a legitimized bastard creates complications that might be exploited to weaken northern unity. Jon begins to understand that his new status makes him not merely a political asset, but also a target for those whose interests would benefit from Stark family discord or northern political instability. 3 weeks into their stay, news arrives that transforms their understanding of the capital's true nature. A merchant's daughter has been found murdered in circumstances that suggest high-born involvement. Yet the investigation proceeds with obvious reluctance and deliberate inefficiency that ensures no meaningful conclusions will be reached. Jon watches Ned's growing frustration as evidence disappears, witnesses refuse to testify, and officials cite various procedural complications that prevent justice from being pursued effectively. This is why the North must remain strong, Ned tells him privately that evening, while they walk through relatively secure sections of the Red Keep's gardens. This corruption spreads like a plague. It transforms good men into accomplices and makes victims of anyone without sufficient power to protect themselves. Your legitimization matters not because it grants you titles or lands, but because it ensures the North will always have leaders who remember what honor means when power is tested by temptation and convenience. Jon absorbs these words while examining the subtle ways that King's Landing operates according to unspoken rules that prioritize influence over justice and connection over competence. The merchant's daughter becomes a symbol in his mind of everything that distinguishes northern governance from southern political culture, and he begins to develop an appreciation for the systematic differences that make Winterfell's approach to leadership fundamentally incompatible with the capital's methods. Tyrion Lannister approaches him 3 days after this conversation, while Jon stands in the Red Keep's library, examining texts about inheritance law and northern history. The dwarf moves with calculated casualness, selecting books with obvious deliberation, while positioning himself within conversational range. Fascinating reading material for someone who supposedly came south for ceremonial purposes, Tyrion observes without looking directly at Jon. Though I suppose newly legitimized bastards must educate themselves about precedents and legal frameworks that might prove relevant to their future responsibilities. Jon recognizes the invitation embedded in this seemingly casual comment and responds with equal indirection. Knowledge serves many purposes, Lord Tyrion. Sometimes understanding history helps one navigate present circumstances more effectively. They continue this verbal dance for several minutes, each testing the other's intelligence and political awareness, while maintaining plausible deniability about their true intentions. Tyrion eventually abandons subtlety and addresses Jon directly about matters that concern them both. Your father investigates Jon Arryn's death with admirable determination, but insufficient appreciation for the personal costs such investigations can impose on those who pursue them too aggressively. Perhaps someone with fewer obvious political connections might gather information more effectively than the Hand himself can manage through official channels. Jon considers this proposal carefully, recognizing both its potential value and its inherent dangers. Working with Tyrion would provide access to Lannister family insights and connections that might prove crucial for understanding the conspiracy surrounding Arryn's murder. But it would also create obligations and associations that could compromise his family's political position if discovered. He agrees to limited cooperation while maintaining strict boundaries about information sharing and mutual assistance. Their collaboration produces results within days, as Jon's bastard status allows him to move through taverns, brothels, and merchant quarters, where Ned's presence would attract unwanted attention and official scrutiny. He speaks with servants who attended Arryn during his final illness, questions merchants who supplied the Tower of the Hand with food and medicine, and cultivates relationships with guards whose duties provided them with access to sensitive information. Tyrion contributes analysis and connections that help Jon interpret the significance of apparently unrelated events and identify patterns that suggest coordinated deception rather than natural causes for the former Hand's death. Together, they construct a timeline that reveals suspicious activities in the weeks preceding Arryn's final illness, including unusual visitors, modified security arrangements, and communications that were deliberately kept secret from Arryn's most trusted advisors. The evidence points toward Lannister family involvement, but Tyrion's participation in the investigation complicates Jon's ability to share findings with Ned without revealing his source. He must carefully filter information to provide his father with actionable intelligence while protecting Tyrion from accusations that could destroy their collaboration and potentially trigger violent confrontation between their families. This delicate balance becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as their discoveries reveal the scope of the conspiracy and the number of people who must have participated in planning and executing Jon Arryn's murder. Jon realizes that exposing the truth will require confronting powerful individuals who possess both motive and capability for eliminating threats to their interests, making his family's situation far more dangerous than anyone initially understood. Ned's own investigation proceeds along official channels with predictable frustration as key witnesses develop convenient memory problems. Crucial documents disappear from secured locations, and administrative delays prevent timely examination of evidence. Jon watches his father struggle against systematic obstruction that appears coordinated and comprehensive enough to suggest royal involvement or approval. The difference between Jon's findings and Ned's official discoveries becomes stark enough to convince them both that someone with significant authority has ordered the investigation's failure and is prepared to use violence to ensure their orders are followed. When Ned finally admits that he suspects the Queen's involvement in Arryn's death, Jon shares carefully edited versions of his own discoveries that confirm these suspicions without revealing Tyrion's cooperation. Their planning session that night focuses on escape routes and contingency measures rather than political solutions or diplomatic approaches to resolving their dangerous situation. Ned acknowledges that remaining in King's Landing has become untenable once they possess evidence of royal family participation in murdering the previous hand. Jon suggests immediate departure using cover stories that would allow them to reach the north before their enemies can organize pursuit or retaliation. They agree to begin preparations immediately while maintaining normal routines to avoid arousing suspicion about their intentions or timeline. Ned assigns specific responsibilities for securing transportation, gathering essential documents, and communicating with northern allies who might provide assistance during their journey home. The betrayal comes from an unexpected source as Littlefinger provides information about their escape plans to Cersei in exchange for considerations that Ned never learns about before his capture. Jon receives warning from Tyrion barely in time to avoid the guards who arrest his father during what should have been a routine meeting about administrative matters. The dwarf's message reaches him through a servant who speaks carefully chosen words about library schedules being modified due to unexpected maintenance requirements. Jon understands immediately that their situation has collapsed and that remaining in the Red Keep means certain imprisonment or death. He makes rapid decisions about which belongings to abandon, which routes to use for leaving the castle, and which allies might still provide assistance despite the changed circumstances. His escape requires abandoning Ned to imprisonment while hoping that political considerations will prevent the Queen from ordering immediate execution of the North's most powerful lord. Jon must choose between attempting a rescue that would certainly fail and preserving his freedom to organize future efforts that might actually succeed in saving his father's life. The decision tears at him as he moves through servants' passages and lesser-known exits, while guards search more obvious locations for signs of his presence. By dawn, he has reached the city's outskirts, where loyal Stark men wait with horses and supplies for a desperate journey toward safety. But his father remains trapped in circumstances that grow more dangerous with each hour that passes without resolution. The capital fades behind them as Jon realizes that his brief time in King's Landing has transformed him from a political curiosity into a fugitive whose survival depends on reaching allies who might possess sufficient power to challenge royal authority and secure Ned's release through negotiation or force. Though the odds of success diminish with every mile they travel away from the dungeons where his father waits in darkness, while political forces gather momentum across the realm like storm clouds building toward inevitable collision. The roads north prove treacherous with royal patrols searching for fugitives, forcing Jon and his companions to travel by night through forests and abandoned paths that add precious days to their journey. While news of Ned's imprisonment spreads faster than their horses can carry them toward Winterfell, each delay feels like betrayal. Each cautious detour through lesser-known routes seems to abandon Ned further to whatever fate the Queen might devise for a man who dared challenge her children's legitimacy before the entire court. The great castle appears on the horizon just as ravens begin arriving from King's Landing with official proclamations of treason and demands for northern submission. But Jon reaches the gates first with personal testimony about the conspiracy that destroyed their family's honor and safety in a single morning of calculated betrayal. Robb waits in the Great Hall, where banners hang heavy with the weight of decisions that will determine whether the North bends the knee or raises its swords against Southern tyranny. His young face already showing signs of the burden that leadership places on shoulders too young to bear such responsibility alone. "They have, Father," Jon says without ceremony, the simple words carrying implications that transform everything about Winterfell's atmosphere in an instant. "The Queen moved against us the moment Robert died. She planned this." Robb's hands tighten on the arms of his chair as details spill forth about Cersei's preparations, about the gold cloaks turning traitor, about how quickly royal power consolidated around Joffrey's supposed legitimacy, while their father's supporters found themselves isolated and helpless against superior numbers and careful planning. The legitimized bastard becomes the bearer of news that demands immediate action while offering no clear path toward success, his presence transforming him from returning family member into strategic advisor whose counsel might determine whether the Stark name survives the coming storm. "We raise the banners," Robb declares, his voice carrying conviction that masks the uncertainty Jon can see in his eyes. "Every house sworn to Winterfell, every man who can hold a sword." The Great Hall fills with northern lords who arrive throughout the following days, carrying their own ravens' messages and their own assessments of royal strength versus northern resolve, each voice adding to debates that stretch through long nights as they calculate numbers and logistics and political ramifications of open rebellion against the Iron Throne. Jon finds himself speaking with authority that surprises even him, his legitimization providing weight to strategic suggestions that might otherwise be dismissed as bastard presumption. His recent experience in the capital offering insights that prove invaluable for planning military campaigns against enemies who understand courtly intrigue better than northern honor. Theon Greyjoy returns from his mission to the Iron Islands, carrying promises of alliance that sound hollow when measured against Balon Greyjoy's well-known ambitions. His easy confidence masking whatever private instructions his father might have provided for exploiting northern weakness while appearing to offer support. Jon watches the Ironborn heir carefully during council meetings, noting how Theon's suggestions consistently favor naval strategies that would place Greyjoy ships in advantageous positions rather than supporting purely land-based campaigns that might serve Stark interests more directly. Your father's ships could transport men quickly between coastal positions, Theon argues during one late-night strategy session, his words carrying enthusiasm that feels calculated. Strike where the enemy expects no northern presence. Jon recognizes the dangerous appeal of such proposals while questioning their true purpose, understanding that Balon Greyjoy's support comes with prices that might prove higher than any immediate military advantage justifies. The discussions reveal how quickly alliances become complications when each potential ally pursues separate objectives that may conflict with Stark's survival, forcing Robb to navigate political currents that threaten to pull his rebellion in directions that serve other houses' ambitions, rather than rescuing Ned from royal dungeons. Maester Luwin brings reports from across the realm describing how other great houses respond to news of Robert's death and Joffrey's coronation, each message revealing new layers of complexity, as lords choose sides based on calculations that extend far beyond simple loyalty to rightful kings. The Lannisters mobilize Western forces, while Stannis Baratheon gathers support at Dragonstone, creating multiple centers of power that transform the political landscape into something far more dangerous than simple North versus South conflict. We need allies who will actually fight, Jon tells his brother during a private moment between council meetings, his voice carrying the weight of hard-learned lessons about political promises versus military reality. Pretty words from fair-weather friends will not save father's life. Robb nods with understanding that shows how quickly leadership ages young men, his decisions carrying consequences that ripple outward to affect thousands of lives across territories that stretch from the wall to the neck. The logistics of raising armies reveal themselves as more complex than simply calling banners, requiring coordination of supplies and communications and tactical planning that must account for terrain and weather and enemy responses that change with each day of preparation. Winterfell transforms into a command center where ravens arrive constantly with updates about troop movements and political developments, where weapon stores receive frantic attention as smiths work through nights, forging additional spear points and arrowheads, where the castle's very stones seem to vibrate with anticipation of violence that approaches like an inevitable tide. Jon finds himself moving between responsibilities that range from strategic planning to managing supply lines to evaluating the reliability of various house pledges. His legitimization allowing him to speak with authority that proves essential for maintaining unity among lords whose cooperation determines whether their rebellion succeeds or collapses into factional squabbling. The first northern armies begin gathering at designated assembly points as autumn deepens toward winter, their banners creating a tapestry of loyalty that spreads across landscapes that have known peace for nearly 2 decades under Robert's reign. Jon looks out from Winterfell's walls at the martial preparations taking shape below, while ravens carry increasingly urgent messages about developments in King's Landing that suggest time runs shorter with each passing day, knowing that their window for successful negotiation closes as military positions harden into patterns that make peaceful resolution impossible to achieve through anything other than complete victory or devastating defeat that would leave the North vulnerable to enemies who would exploit their weakness for generations to come. The first test arrives sooner than anticipated, when Lord Karstark's riders bring word that a Lannister force under Sir Jaime has moved faster than expected, bypassing several strongholds to strike directly at River Run, where Catelyn's brother Edmure commands forces that prove insufficient to hold against the legendary knight's aggressive tactics. Robb calls his war council immediately, the great hall filled with bannermen whose faces reflect the gravity of decisions that cannot be delayed or reconsidered once made. Jon stands at his brother's right hand, his position no longer questioned by lords who have watched him demonstrate strategic thinking that complements Robb's natural leadership in ways that strengthen rather than complicate their command structure. We cannot allow Riverrun to fall, Robb declares, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has accepted responsibility for thousands of lives. The Tullys are our kin, and their lands control river crossings that Tywin will use to divide our forces. Lord Umber leans forward across the wooden table, his massive frame casting shadows in the flickering torchlight. The boy speaks truth. Let Jaime take those crossings, and we'll be fighting on ground of his choosing instead of ours. Jon studies the maps spread before them, his fingers tracing possible routes of advance that must account for terrain, weather, and the political implications of every tactical decision. We have advantages Jaime cannot match, he says quietly, his words carrying through the hall with clarity that commands attention. Northern soldiers know how to fight in weather that slows southern knights. Our supply lines run shorter than theirs, and we understand this landscape in ways that make their maps worthless. Speed matters more than comfort, Robb adds, his strategic thinking aligning with Jon's assessment in ways that demonstrate their developing partnership. If we move quickly enough, we can engage Jaime's forces before they complete their siege preparations. The great Jon pounds his fist against the table, enthusiasm evident in his gruff laughter. My men are ready to march tonight if necessary. These Southron lords think northern steel cuts differently in cold weather, and I intend to prove them correct. Jon nods, but his expression remains cautious as he considers factors that extend beyond immediate battlefield concerns. We must also consider what happens after we engage Jaime's forces. Victory brings its own problems, especially if we capture someone of his political value. Catelyn speaks from her position near the hearth, her voice carrying maternal concern mixed with political awareness. Jon raises important questions. Jaime Lannister is not simply another enemy commander. He is the Queen's brother, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and someone whose capture would force Tywin's hand in ways we might not be prepared to handle. The discussion continues deep into the night as maps are consulted, supply requirements calculated, and messenger ravens prepared to coordinate movements with allied forces throughout the north. Jon finds himself repeatedly called upon to evaluate tactical options, his growing reputation among the bannermen evident in how they listen when he speaks, and incorporate his suggestions into their own strategic thinking. Dawn breaks gray and cold as northern armies begin their march south, banners streaming in the autumn winds that carry the promise of winter's approach. Jon rides alongside Robb at the column's head, both brothers sharing an understanding that this represents their first real test as war leaders rather than participants in tournaments or training exercises. The landscape changes gradually as they move away from Winterfell's familiar territory, forests giving way to more open country where cavalry can operate effectively. but where northern advantages in mobility and terrain knowledge become more pronounced. Jon observes everything with calculating attention, noting defensive positions, potential ambush sites, and the subtle signs that indicate whether local populations support their cause or maintain cautious neutrality. Their scouts bring regular updates about enemy movements, creating a tactical picture that shifts constantly as both armies maneuver for advantageous positions. Jaime's forces prove more mobile than expected, their southern knights adapting to northern conditions better than Jon initially predicted, forcing continuous adjustments to their planned approach routes. He knows we're coming. Robb observes as they make camp on their third night of marching, his tent serving as headquarters, where intelligence reports receive analysis that determines their next moves. The question becomes whether he'll attempt to meet us in open battle or continue his siege operations. Jon spreads fresh maps across the campaign table, marking confirmed enemy positions alongside probable deployment patterns. Jaime has always preferred aggressive action to defensive waiting. He'll want to engage us where his cavalry advantages can prove decisive. Then we give him battle on ground that favors our strengths. Robb replies, his tactical thinking showing the influence of years spent learning warfare from their father and the castle's master-at-arms. Northern spearmen have broken southern charges before. The opportunity comes 2 days later when scouts report that Jaime's forces have abandoned their siege positions to advance toward their position, apparently confident in their ability to defeat northern armies in direct confrontation. Jon studies the approaching battlefield with experienced eyes, noting how the terrain offers both opportunities and risks that could determine the engagement's outcome, regardless of individual courage or skill. The armies deploy in morning mist that obscures exact positions, while drums beat rhythms that echo across fields where men prepare to kill and die for causes larger than themselves. Jon takes position with the northern reserves, his role requiring him to observe the battle's development, while remaining ready to commit forces where they can achieve maximum impact on the engagement's final result. Steel clashes against steel as charges meet countercharges, banners rising and falling in the swirling confusion of combat that transforms careful plans into desperate improvisations based on split-second decisions that cannot be reconsidered or revised. Jon watches Robb lead from the front, his brother's courage inspiring northern soldiers while creating tactical opportunities that careful positioning can exploit. The battle's turning point comes when Jaime personally leads a cavalry charge against what appears to be a weakened section of their line, his golden armor gleaming in filtered sunlight as his horse pounds across ground that seems perfectly suited for the devastating impact Southern Knights can achieve when properly deployed. Jon realizes immediately that his brother has created an elaborate deception, allowing Jaime to believe he has found a breakthrough opportunity while actually drawing the legendary knight into a carefully prepared trap where northern spears wait in concealed positions that will render cavalry charges suicidal rather than decisive. Jaime's charge strikes the false weak point with tremendous force, his knights driving deep into northern ranks before discovering that retreat has become impossible, as concealed spearmen emerge from positions that convert their advance into an encirclement, where southern armor becomes liability rather than protection. The Golden Knight fights with desperate skill as he realizes his tactical error, but individual prowess cannot overcome strategic disadvantage when properly exploited by commanders who understand both terrain and timing. Jon signals the final movement that closes the trap completely. Northern forces converging from multiple directions to ensure that escape routes disappear, while surrender becomes the only alternative to annihilation for knights whose horses cannot maneuver effectively in terrain that has been carefully prepared to negate their primary advantages. Jaime Lannister, the man whose sword has never known defeat in single combat, finds himself surrounded by northern spears, while his golden armor bears the dents and scratches that mark the end of his reputation for invincibility in battle. The implications of capturing such a valuable prisoner extend far beyond simple tactical victory, creating political opportunities that could reshape the war's entire strategic landscape if properly managed, but also generating risks that could prove catastrophic if Tywin Lannister decides that recovering his son requires destroying everything that stands between him and the Golden Knight's capture sends ripples through both armies. But Jon's attention turns northward, where darker news arrives with ravens bearing the Stark seal. Maester Luwin's careful script conveys horror in measured words. Winterfell has fallen to Theon Greyjoy. Bran and Rickon are dead, their bodies burned and displayed upon the castle walls like trophies of conquest. The words blur before Jon's eyes as he reads them again, searching for some alternative interpretation that might soften the brutal reality. But the Maester's precision leaves no room for hope or misunderstanding. Robb's face hardens to stone when Jon shares the letter. The king in the north aging years in the space of heartbeats as he absorbs the magnitude of their loss. Theon, he whispers, the name carrying poison that seeps through every syllable. I called him brother. The great tent falls silent, except for the distant sounds of an army maintaining itself. Horses snorting, men sharpening weapons, sentries calling challenges through the gathering dusk. Jon watches his brother wrestle with grief and rage, seeing how kingship has taught Robb to compartmentalize emotion, even as it threatens to overwhelm him completely. The war council that gathers around them speaks in hushed tones of strategy and revenge, but Jon's mind moves along different channels entirely, calculating distances and possibilities with the cold precision that battle has taught him. I'll go north, Jon says, his voice cutting through the murmured discussions. Take a small force and retake Winterfell while you press the advantage here. Robb's eyes snap to him with desperate hope, warring against protective instinct. Jon, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you what needs to happen. Jon spreads his hands across the campaign table, fingers tracing familiar routes through the neck and up the King's Road. Jaime's capture gives you leverage with Tywin, but only if you can hold what you've won. Losing Winterfell undermines everything: your legitimacy, your ability to supply this army from northern granaries, your claim to the loyalty of houses that might waver if they think the Starks can't protect their own seat. The great Jon pounds his fist against his thigh with approval. The boy speaks sense. We can't let that kraken whelp hold Winterfell while we chase golden lions through the riverlands. Catelyn's voice carries quiet desperation when she speaks. What if it's a trap? What if Theon expects us to divide our forces, to weaken ourselves chasing shadows while the real threat grows stronger? Jon meets her gaze steadily, seeing the mother's fear beneath the political calculation. Then we spring it carefully. A small force moves faster than an army, hits harder than expected, disappears before reinforcements arrive. Theon took Winterfell with 20 men because he knew its weaknesses. I know them better. The planning unfolds through the night hours. Jon selecting men who understand stealth over spectacle, Northern Lords' younger sons seeking to prove themselves, Rangers who learned their craft in the Shadow Tower, sellswords whose loyalty has been purchased with Lannister gold taken from captured supply trains. Daisy Mormont volunteers immediately, her axe singing softly as she tests its edge against her thumb, while Smaljin Umber grins with anticipation at the prospect of night fighting in terrain that favors the wolf over the kraken. 3 days of hard riding bring them to the edges of the Wolf's Wood, where familiar trees whisper secrets that Jon remembers from childhood hunts with his father and brothers. The Ironborn have posted guards along the obvious approaches, but Jon leads his small force through game trails that Theon never learned, paths that wind between ancient oaks and through clearings where wildflowers grow thick enough to muffle hoofbeats completely. The first Ironborn sentry dies without sound, Daisy's throwing axe taking him in the chest before he can raise his horn to his lips. The second falls to a crossbow bolt that Jon fires from shadows deep enough to conceal an entire army, while the third simply vanishes when Smalljon's massive hands close around his throat with the inexorable pressure of a closing trap. Winterfell's walls rise before them in the pre-dawn darkness, torches flickering along battlements where Ironborn guards patrol with the confidence of men who believe themselves secure in their conquest. Jon counts their numbers carefully, noting how they cluster around the main gatehouse while leaving the eastern walls less heavily defended. A mistake born of not understanding how northern castles are designed to channel attackers toward prepared killing grounds. The servant's entrance that Jon remembers from childhood games remains unguarded, its location too minor for Theon to have considered worth defending. Jon's men slip through shadows that cling to Winterfell's stones like old memories, moving through passages that servants have used for generations to carry supplies and messages without disturbing their lord's important business above. Inside the castle, whispered conversations reveal the truth that makes Jon's heart leap with hope and rage in equal measure. Bran and Rickon live, hidden in Winterfell's crypts with Osha the wildling woman and Hodor, the simple giant whose loyalty runs deeper than any oath. The bodies on the walls belong to Miller's boys, whose only crime was resembling Stark children closely enough to serve Theon's desperate need for proof of his victory's completeness. Master Luwin coordinates the resistance from his tower, using ravens to spread word that the Ironborn occupation grows weaker each day as homesickness and fear erode their discipline. Northern servants sabotage supplies and create accidents that claim Ironborn lives with suspicious regularity, while local lords gather forces in hidden camps throughout the surrounding countryside, waiting for the signal to converge on Winterfell with overwhelming numbers. Jon sends word through channels that Luwin has established, calling these loyal forces to move at dawn, when the eastern sun will blind defenders on the walls long enough for scaling ladders to find their purchase. The plan unfolds with mathematical precision, each element timed to support the others in a symphony of coordinated violence that will reclaim the ancient seat of House Stark from pretenders who never understood that holding Winterfell requires more than simply occupying its stones. Theon Greyjoy paces the battlements as the first light touches the horizon, his confidence beginning to crack as reports filter in of northern forces appearing from multiple directions simultaneously, their banners displaying the direwolf that many believed had been extinguished forever. The young Kraken realizes with growing horror that his tactical position has deteriorated beyond recovery, that he faces not scattered resistance, but coordinated assault from commanders who know Winterfell's strengths and weaknesses better than he ever could. But recognition comes too late to prevent the consequences of decisions made in arrogance and maintained through desperation as the castle's wooden gates splinter under the coordinated battering of men who built their muscles hauling stone blocks during Winterfell's construction. Their intimate knowledge of every weakness now turned against the iron-born occupiers who never bothered to learn the castle's true nature. Bran watches from the highest window of the broken tower as his brother's forces pour through breaches in defenses that Theon's men cannot possibly hold. The young Stark's eyes reflecting depths of knowledge that go far beyond his years, seeing patterns in the battle below that connect to larger movements across the continent like threads in some vast and terrible tapestry. The reunion between Jon and his brother unfolds in the castle's godswood, where ancient weirwood roots drink deep of blood spilled in reclaiming what was always theirs, and Bran's voice carries undertones that make Jon step back despite his joy at finding his brother alive. "You were meant to take the black," Bran says quietly, his words carrying weight that seems to press against Jon's chest like stones. "The three-eyed raven showed me. You were meant to stand guard at the wall, to learn what comes with the cold winds." His fingers trace patterns in the earth between the great tree's roots, movements that seem to follow pathways only he can see. But you chose a different path, and now the watchers grow fewer while the dead grow more. Jon kneels beside his brother, studying the changes that northern captivity has wrought in the boy's face, noting how Bran's gaze seems to focus on distant points beyond the physical world. "What do you see, brother? What comes from beyond the wall?" The questions emerge from deep concerns that have gnawed at Jon's thoughts during quiet moments between battles, fears that choosing family over duty might have consequences reaching far beyond personal ambition. "The Night's Watch sends ravens," Bran replies, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting prophecy rather than sharing conversation. "Black wings carrying tales of wildling armies moving south in numbers not seen for centuries, but they flee something worse than steel and fire. The dead walk in their lands, brother. Ancient kings wake from barrows that have held them for thousands of years." His fingers continue their strange patterns, drawing symbols that seem to shift and change, even as Jon watches. Lord Commander Mormont writes to Father, but Father lies in King's Landing dungeon, so the letters come to Master Luwin instead, carrying word of rangers who return as something other than men. The Maester's Solar becomes a war room, where maps spread across every surface show defensive positions throughout the north, while ravens arrive with increasing frequency, carrying reports that would sound like madness from any source less reliable than the sworn brothers of the Night's Watch. Luwin reads each message aloud with careful precision, his voice growing more strained as patterns emerge from scattered reports of abandoned wildling villages, strange lights dancing in winter skies, and ranging parties that vanish completely, only to reappear attacking their former brothers with weapons of ice and eyes like frozen stars. Jon listens with growing comprehension that his choice to remain in Winterfell rather than take black robes has left crucial gaps in defenses that were meant to hold back threats older than the Seven Kingdoms themselves. The wall stands undermanned, He tells Robb during council sessions, where northern lords debate deployment of forces to face more conventional enemies. Every sword we keep in the south weakens the watch that guards the realms of men. His arguments meet resistance from bannermen who see only political calculations, viewing the Night's Watch as distant concern compared to immediate threats from Lannisters and Baratheons who actually affect their lands and incomes. Jon, you speak of children's stories, Lord Umber declares from his seat at the council table, his voice carrying dismissive authority of someone who has never seen beyond the wall. The dead do not walk. Wildlings raid as they always have. The Watch calls for men because they always call for men. Other lords nod agreement, their focus remaining fixed on tangible enemies who threaten their holdings with real armies rather than mythical dangers from grandmother's tales. But Bran's revelations carry weight that transforms Jon's understanding of choices made and paths not taken, showing him visions through the Weirwood network of massive armies gathering in lands where summer never comes, led by figures whose crowns gleam with cold light, while their mounts leave no tracks in snow that never melts. The young Stark sees through his brother's strange new sight how the Night King's forces grow stronger with every battle, adding fallen enemies to ranks that swell beyond counting, and recognizes with dawning horror that political conflicts consuming the South serve the ancient enemy's purposes by weakening defenses when unity becomes more crucial than ever before. Send men to the wall, Jon urges during another council session, his voice carrying desperate conviction that makes some lords shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Whatever forces we can spare, the Watch needs reinforcement before winter truly comes. His pleas fall on ears that hear only resource allocation rather than existential necessity. Lords calculating how many swords they can afford to lose from immediate conflicts rather than comprehending that failure at the wall would make all other battles meaningless. Master Lewin supports Jon's arguments with careful documentation from Night's Watch correspondence, spreading letters across the table that detail encounters with enemies no living man should face. But even scholarly evidence fails to penetrate noble skepticism rooted in generations of treating the wall as distant concern, rather than first line of defense against annihilation itself. The Maester's weathered hands shake slightly as he reads accounts of entire wildling clans found frozen in their camps, with expressions of terror carved permanently into features that show no wounds from conventional weapons, their bodies arranged in patterns that suggest ritual rather than random slaughter. Jon begins implementing defensive measures despite political resistance, sending messages to smaller houses whose loyalty runs deeper than immediate self-interest, calling for volunteers to reinforce the Watch while simultaneously strengthening Winterfell's own defenses against threats that might penetrate the wall's protection. He establishes supply lines to Castle Black, organizing shipments of dragon-glass weapons that Samwell Tarly's letters identify as effective against creatures that conventional steel cannot touch, while training selected men in combat techniques designed for enemies that feel no pain and fear no death. The work proceeds in shadows of political maneuvering, hidden from lords who would consider such preparations wasteful allocation of resources needed for more immediate concerns. But Jon recognizes that winter approaches with threats that make succession disputes seem trivial by comparison. His agents move through the north, establishing caches of supplies and weapons at strategic points, creating fallback positions for populations that might need protection when ancient evils march south through breached defenses, while ravens carry coded messages to loyal houses, warning of dangers that official communications cannot acknowledge without triggering panic that would shatter already fragile political alliances. Bran's abilities grow stronger with each passing day, his connection to the Weirwood network revealing movements beyond the wall that show the Night King's forces testing defenses along the ancient barrier, probing for weaknesses while gathering strength from every wildling clan that falls to their inexorable advance. The young Stark shares visions of massive siege engines built from ice and bone, weapons designed to bring down walls thought impregnable, while armies of the dead practice maneuvers that demonstrate tactical sophistication, suggesting intelligence far beyond mere reanimated corpses. They remember, Bran whispers during one of their private conversations in the Godswood, his voice carrying weight of terrible knowledge. The Night King remembers the last time men tried to stand against him. He learns from victory and defeat alike, growing stronger while we grow weaker with every house that falls to southern politics. Jon studies his brother's face in the dappled light, filtering through ancient branches, recognizing the burden of knowledge that ages children before their time. The Godswood offers sanctuary from the constant stream of ravens bearing reports from across the realm, each message bringing news that fractures their understanding of what battles matter most. My lord. Davos approaches with measured steps, his weathered face grave with fresh intelligence. Word from the twins. The Onion Knight's voice carries weight that makes Jon's stomach clench before hearing details. Letters bearing the flayed man of House Bolton arrive simultaneously, their seals intact, but their contents promising devastation that will reshape every calculation. Catelyn Stark's body floats face down in the Green Fork, while Walder Frey's men strip rings from her fingers, their laughter echoing across water that runs red with northern blood. Robb falls with crossbow bolts in his chest, Grey Wind's head sewn onto his shoulders in mockery that transforms a king into a grotesque puppet. The young wolf dies believing his crown carries meaning, while enemy blades pierce hearts that beat for independence that never truly existed. Jon reads each word with growing horror, his hands steady despite the earthquake, reshaping his world. The North's last crowned king dies at a wedding feast, betrayed by oaths sworn in salt and guest right that meant nothing to men who calculate loyalty in gold rather than honor. Every plan built around Robb's leadership crumbles like castles made of snow, leaving gaps in their resistance that enemies will exploit with ruthless efficiency. How many survived? His voice remains level through discipline learned in years of bastard silence, though his knuckles whiten around parchment edges. The casualties extend beyond Robb himself. Northern lords who followed their king into Frey hospitality find graves in Riverland soil, their deaths removing experienced commanders who understood the delicate balance of maintaining rebellion against superior forces. Lord Karstark's heir among the dead, along with most of their heavy cavalry. Davos reports with the measured tone of a man who has delivered catastrophic news before. The Mormont women escaped with perhaps 200 men, but Lady Mage took wounds that may prove mortal. House Manderley lost 3 ships to Ironborn raiders while sailing to support the king. They arrived to find burning tents and Bolton banners flying over camps they helped establish. Sansa remains trapped in King's Landing, while Arya vanishes somewhere in the Riverlands, her fate unknown amid the chaos following their father's execution. Rickon and Bran depend entirely on Jon's protection now, their survival linked to decisions he makes without crown or claim beyond the responsibility of being the eldest Stark still capable of fighting. The weight of Guardian falls upon shoulders that never expected to bear the future of their house. Summon the remaining lords, Jon commands, his mind already calculating which houses might still honor Stark loyalty when easier paths to survival present themselves. We need to know who stands with us when standing becomes dangerous rather than profitable. The Great Hall of Winterfell will host discussions that determine whether the North continues resistance or accepts Southern rule purchased with Northern blood. Lord Manderly arrives within the day despite his ship's losses, his massive frame filling doorways while his eyes burn with rage that makes his jolly demeanor seem like elaborate theater. They killed my son at those accursed twins, he rumbles, each word carrying promise of vengeance that will outlast winter itself. Wendell died believing he served a cause greater than Freygold. I intend to prove him right. The remaining northern houses gather in Winterfell's Great Hall, like survivors of a shipwreck, their numbers reduced, but their resolve hardened by shared losses that bind them closer than blood. Lady Mormont brings news of Ironborn raids along their coasts, while House Umber reports wildling movements that suggest pressure from beyond the wall grows stronger with each passing moon. Every problem compounds others, creating cascading crises that demand solutions no single leader can provide. We cannot fight the Iron Throne's armies directly. Jon addresses the assembled lords with honesty that some might consider weakness, but which earns nods of recognition from men who understand mathematics of warfare. Our strength lies in knowing this land better than any southern force, in making every mile they advance cost more than they can afford to pay. Sir Roderick speaks from experience earned in decades of service to House Stark. Guerrilla tactics require safe havens and supply lines that enemy forces cannot easily target. The North offers advantages in terrain, but we need allies who can provide resources while remaining beyond immediate retaliation. His scarred hands trace maps showing mountain passes and forest roads that armies might avoid, but small forces could use to devastating effect. Ravens fly toward Storm's End, bearing carefully worded messages that avoid treasonous language while making clear Jon Snow seeks dialogue with Stannis Baratheon. The rightful king, by his own reckoning, commands forces that could prove decisive if properly motivated by shared enemies and mutual advantage. Jon's letter emphasizes northern knowledge of terrain and supply routes that could facilitate a campaign southward while offering intelligence networks built over generations of Stark rule. The Iron Bank grows concerned about the Crown's debts. Tyrion's spies report through channels that remain functional despite his family's current ascendancy. Default threatens their profits, while civil war disrupts trade routes that generate revenue streams they depend upon for stability. Financial pressure applied in the right places might accomplish what armies cannot, turning economic necessity into political leverage that forces concessions from seemingly victorious enemies. Jon studies maps that show Ironborn movements along western coasts, while wildling clans press against the wall with desperation that speaks to pressures beyond normal seasonal migrations. every threat compounds others until traditional approaches to defense become inadequate against enemies who attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The game changes when survival requires alliance with forces previously considered hostile or irrelevant. Mance Rayder seeks passage south. Reports arrive through rangers who maintain contact with wildling leaders despite official policies that treat all free folk as enemies. His people flee something that makes the Night's Watch seem preferable to whatever pursues them beyond the wall. They bring stories of villages found empty, with signs of struggle but no bodies, as if entire populations simply vanished into winter storms that leave no tracks. The convergence of crises creates opportunities disguised as disasters, moments when traditional enemies might recognize shared interests that transcend historical grievances. Jon realizes his role evolves beyond simple resistance against Southern rule. He becomes a coordinator of survival strategies that must account for threats both political and supernatural, both immediate and approaching, like winter storms that gather strength in darkness beyond human sight. Bran's visions grow more specific as his abilities develop under the guidance of ancient powers that flow through weirwood networks spanning continents. I see kings made of ice commanding armies that remember every battle they ever fought. The boy reports during their evening conversations beside heart trees that pulse with knowledge older than human memory. They study maps drawn in blood across frozen ground, planning campaigns that account for every castle, every road, every choice that living men might make when faced with enemies that cannot die by conventional means. The Red Wedding's aftermath forces Jon to think beyond the Game of Thrones, toward conflicts that will determine whether any throne matters when winter comes, with armies that serve powers hostile to all human ambition. His letters to potential allies speak carefully of northern independence, while hinting at larger concerns that require cooperation, transcending regional politics, creating networks that might prove essential when ancient enemies march south through barriers that have protected the realm for thousands of years, but now show cracks that widen with each passing season. Stannis Baratheon's response arrives sealed with the crowned stag of his house, its contents revealing a mind that calculates advantage with precision that matches Jon's own strategic thinking. The North offers valuable assets in any campaign against the usurpers currently occupying the Iron Throne. The king writes in script that reveals education and authority earned through military experience, rather than inherited privilege. However, alliance requires trust built through shared sacrifice, rather than mere correspondence between parties who have never. The king's letter dissolves into ash as Jon feeds it to the flames crackling in the solar of Winterfell, its promises of alliance contingent upon terms that would bind the North to Stannis Baratheon's cause in ways that might prove costly when threats emerge that dwarf the Game of Thrones entirely. Ravens arrive throughout the morning, carrying desperate pleas from Castle Black, where Lord Commander Mormont's successors struggle to maintain defensive positions along the wall, with barely 300 sworn brothers remaining after years of attrition, desertion, and the catastrophic ranging beyond the wall that claimed so many experienced rangers that the Watch now relies upon green boys and aging men to patrol barriers that once seemed impregnable. The messages paint pictures of organized wildling forces gathering under banners that have never united the free folk before. Led by a man who once wore the black himself before abandoning his vows to claim kingship beyond the wall, through methods that blend charisma with strategic thinking sophisticated enough to forge alliances between clans that have feuded for generations. Mance Raiders host numbers in the tens of thousands, according to the Watch's estimates, though such numbers seem impossible until Jon considers that desperation drives migration on scales that peacetime politics rarely contemplate. Entire populations moving south toward barriers they hope to breach or climb or tunnel beneath before winter brings enemies that hunt the living with relentless purpose. Maester Luwin enters the solar-carrying scrolls that map the Watch's remaining strongholds along the wall, his aged hands trembling slightly as he spreads parchment across the oak table where Jon's father once planned campaigns during Robert's rebellion. The ravens bring word that Mance Raiders' forces have reached the haunted forest in strength that exceeds any wildling gathering in recorded history. The Maester reports in voices that carry weight of years spent studying texts that chronicle similar migrations during the Long Night, when the wall was built specifically to prevent such movements from overwhelming the lands of men. Jon studies the defensive positions marked upon the maps, calculating distances and supply lines with precision learned through months of planning northern independence, while accounting for resources depleted by war and harvest failures that have left stores dangerously low throughout the region. Castle Black stands undermanned, but defensible if reinforced quickly enough to establish killing fields that might slow wildling assaults long enough for additional forces to arrive from keeps throughout the north. Though such reinforcement requires lords who remain loyal despite the chaos following the Red Wedding and the collapse of Stark authority in territories now contested by multiple claimants. Send ravens to the mountain clans. Jon decides after examining approaches that wildling forces might use to assault the wall's defenses, his finger tracing paths through terrain that favors attackers who know the land well enough to avoid choke points where disciplined defenders might inflict casualties sufficient to break assault momentum. The Littles, the Wolves, the Norries, they know mountain warfare better than any lord south of the wall, and their loyalty to House Stark runs deeper than political convenience. The Maester nods understanding while preparing ink and parchment for messages that must balance urgency with diplomatic language careful enough to secure cooperation from proud mountain lords who guard their independence jealously even when facing threats that could overwhelm their isolated keeps if wildling forces spread throughout the north unchecked. Jon dictates letters that speak of northern unity while hinting at intelligence gathered through sources that remain unnamed, describing enemy movements that suggest coordination beyond typical wildling raiding patterns, organized by leadership that understands siege warfare well enough to threaten fortifications that have never fallen to assault from the north. Days pass as responses arrive from keeps throughout the mountain regions, their lords agreeing to march with forces that number in the hundreds rather than thousands, but bring expertise in fighting among peaks and valleys, where conventional tactics prove inadequate against enemies who know terrain with intimacy, born of lifetimes spent hunting and raiding across landscapes that challenge even experienced warriors. The Little arrives personally with 60 men who wear mail beneath furs that blend with winter terrain, their weapons maintained with care that speaks of readiness for conflicts that might develop into prolonged campaigns, requiring equipment capable of withstanding harsh conditions and extended combat. The wildlings gather in numbers that exceed counting. The clan chief reports during war councils held in Winterfell's Great Hall, his weathered face bearing scars earned through decades of border skirmishes with free folk raiding parties that occasionally penetrated defenses along the wall to strike isolated settlements before withdrawing into wilderness areas that provide sanctuary for forces familiar with survival in regions where civilization's reach remains tenuous. But they move with purpose rather than the usual raiding patterns, following routes that suggest knowledge of our defensive positions and supply lines. Jon recognizes intelligence gathering that implies leadership sophisticated enough to plan campaigns rather than opportunistic raids, coordination that requires communication networks spanning vast territories, and unified command structure capable of imposing discipline upon warriors accustomed to independence. Such organization suggests threats that extend beyond immediate territorial conflicts toward longer-term strategic objectives that might include establishing permanent settlements south of the Wall, fundamentally altering the balance of power throughout the North through demographic shifts that could overwhelm existing political structures. The march toward the Wall begins before dawn, on a morning when frost covers the ground with crystalline patterns that crunch beneath the hooves of horses carrying riders who understand that speed might prove more valuable than numbers in conflicts that could develop rapidly. Once wildling forces begin their assault upon defensive positions that have protected the realm for millennia, but now face testing by enemies who fight with desperation, born of knowledge that retreat means death from sources more terrible than any living foe. Jon rides with the mountain clansmen and northern lords who answered his call, their combined forces numbering nearly 800 men equipped for warfare in conditions that will test endurance as thoroughly as courage. Their supplies carefully calculated to sustain operations that might extend through weeks of siege warfare if wildling forces prove capable of sustained assault against fortifications that remain formidable despite undermanning that leaves critical gaps in coverage along sections of the wall that require constant patrol to prevent infiltration. The journey north reveals evidence of wildling movement through tracks and abandoned campsites that speak of organized retreat from territories beyond the wall, entire families fleeing south with possessions that suggest permanent migration rather than seasonal raiding. Their numbers confirmed by scouts who report columns of refugees stretching across horizons in movements that resemble the Great Migrations described in historical accounts of population shifts that occur when catastrophic changes force abandonment of traditional territories. Halfway to the Wall, Jon's column encounters outriders from Castle Black, carrying messages that transform strategic calculations through intelligence that confirms the scope of the crisis, developing along barriers that have never faced assault by forces of such magnitude. The Watch's latest estimates place Mance's raiders' host at more than 60,000 souls, including warriors, women, children, and elderly who follow the king beyond the wall in Exodus that represents the largest wildling movement in recorded history. Their desperation evident in willingness to assault fortifications that have never fallen to attack from the north. Lord Commander Mormont requests immediate conference, the outrider reports, while his horse stamps impatiently in snow that deepens as elevation increases toward the wall's imposing presence that dominates the northern horizon, like a barrier between civilization and wilderness that stretches beyond mapping. The Wildling King seeks parley before beginning assault operations that will test our defenses with resources we cannot match. Jon considers intelligence that suggests opportunity for negotiation alongside preparation for warfare that might prove unnecessary if diplomatic solutions emerge through careful handling of communications with leaders who face choices between cooperation and destruction that could consume the North in conflicts that serve no constructive purpose. When greater threats gather strength in regions where winter brings enemies that recognize no distinction between Wildling and Southron, except their shared humanity that makes both potential prey for powers that hunt the living with patient malevolence. The approach to Castle Black reveals defensive preparations that speak of competent leadership, working with resources stretched beyond normal capacity. Though the sight of barely 300 black-clad brothers manning walls designed for thousands creates sobering recognition that conventional defense might prove inadequate against assault by forces that outnumber defenders by margins that challenge tactical thinking, based upon assumptions of reasonable numerical balance between opposing armies. Lord Commander Alliser Thorne greets Jon's arrival with expressions that blend relief at reinforcement with suspicion toward lordlings who have never sworn vows to defend the wall against all enemies that threaten the realm. His weathered features bearing marks of service that spans decades, protecting barriers that most Southron lords regard as distant abstractions rather than critical defensive positions requiring constant vigilance and sacrifice by men who dedicate their lives to duties that receive little recognition from political leaders focused upon Games of Thrones. Your presence here complicates negotiations that might prevent bloodshed unnecessary when facing enemies that gather beyond the wall in numbers that exceed our capacity for resistance. Thorne states bluntly during conferences held in quarters that reveal the austere conditions under which the Watch maintains its eternal vigil against threats that most inhabitants of the Seven Kingdoms prefer to ignore, until crisis forces recognition that some dangers require cooperation, transcending regional politics and personal ambition. Jon studies maps that show wildling positions north of the wall, their camps extending across terrain that could accommodate armies capable of sustained siege operations if properly supplied and coordinated. Though intelligence gathered through ranging parties suggests that Mance, Raiders' forces face their own logistical challenges in maintaining cohesion among diverse groups united primarily through shared desperation rather than established military hierarchy capable of imposing discipline during extended campaigns that test endurance and resolve through hardships that threaten unit cohesion. The King Beyond the Wall seeks passage south rather than conquest of our lands. Thorne continues, while indicating positions where wildling scouts have approached the wall without initiating hostilities that would signal immediate assault preparations, their restraint suggesting willingness to negotiate terms that might allow migration through territories south of the barrier without the massive bloodshed that would result from attempts to breach defenses through direct assault against fortifications designed specifically to prevent such movements. The revelation that Mance Rayder desires negotiation rather than immediate warfare creates opportunities for diplomatic solutions that might preserve lives on both sides, while addressing the underlying crisis that drives wildling migration south toward lands they traditionally regard as enemy territory. Though such negotiations require careful handling of complex political dynamics that involve not only the immediate tactical situation, but also broader strategic considerations regarding northern independence and alliance structures that might prove essential when winter brings threats that dwarf current concerns about wildling movements and territorial disputes. Jon realizes that his position as an outsider to the Night's Watch creates both advantages and complications in approaching negotiations with wildling leadership. His lack of vows providing diplomatic flexibility while potentially undermining authority among Black brothers who view oath-breaking as fundamental betrayal of principles that define their service to the realm, creating tensions that require careful management to maintain unity among defenders who must cooperate regardless of personal feelings about political complications that arise when multiple authorities attempt to coordinate responses to crisis situations. The prospect of parleying with Mance Rayder offers opportunities to gather intelligence about threats that drive wildling desperation, while potentially avoiding bloodshed that would weaken northern defenses at precisely the moment when unity becomes essential for facing enemies that care nothing for the political divisions that separate Wilderling from Southron. Except as tactical advantages that fragmented resistance provides to powers that prefer to defeat opponents through division rather than direct confrontation with unified forces capable of effective resistance to invasion from regions where winter brings darkness that consumes the living through methods that transcend conventional warfare. Standing upon the wall's ancient ice, Jon contemplates the vast wilderness stretching north toward horizons that conceal movements by enemies whose nature demands responses that challenge everything he has learned about warfare and politics. While below in the courtyard of Castle Black, ravens prepare to carry messages that will shape the North's response to crisis that tests not only military capabilities, but also the willingness of proud lords to set aside traditional enmities in favor of cooperation that survival might require when facing threats that recognize no distinction between friend and enemy, except their shared mortality that makes all living creatures potential prey for powers that hunt with patient malevolence through winter nights that stretch toward eternal darkness. The horn sounds once from the wall's summit, its note echoing across ice and stone to announce the approach of wildling emissaries riding under banners that flutter in wind, carrying the scent of snow and pine from forests where entire civilizations prepare to abandon territories their ancestors have held for generations. Their migration south representing not conquest, but flight from something that drives even the fiercest warriors to seek shelter behind walls they have always sought to breach, while Jon prepares to meet with leaders whose desperation might provide insight into threats that require responses transcending every assumption about warfare that has guided his strategic thinking since learning that some enemies cannot be defeated through conventional means, but only through cooperation that unites the living against forces that serve powers hostile to all human ambition, creating alliances that reshape the political landscape through necessity that compels even the most suspicious minds to trust in shared vulnerability. As Mance Rayder himself approaches the gates of Winterfell with an escort that includes giants whose massive forms cast shadows across snow that crunches beneath their steps, their presence testament to desperation that drives entire clans to seek protection behind walls they have spent lifetimes trying to breach. Jon stands atop Winterfell's battlements, watching the procession approach, his breath forming clouds in air that carries the sharp bite of approaching winter, while beside him, Bran grips the stone merlin with hands that tremble not from cold, but from visions that flood his consciousness whenever sleep claims him. Dreams filled with ice-blue eyes that pierce darkness with malevolent intelligence, and armies of the dead that march with purpose that suggests coordination beyond mere instinct. The young Stark's abilities grow stronger each day, his sight penetrating veils between present and future to reveal glimpses of what approaches from the far north, where ancient powers stir with renewed purpose, and the wall itself might not provide sufficient barrier against forces that have waited centuries for winter deep enough to support their advance. They move differently now, Bran whispers to his brother, his voice carrying the distant quality that marks moments when his sight reaches beyond normal perception to touch something vast and alien. The dead ones. They march in formations, like they remember what they were when they lived. The Night King shapes them into weapons. Jon nods without taking his eyes from the approaching delegation, his mind processing implications that extend far beyond immediate tactical concerns. For if the dead retain some echo of their former skills, then fighting them requires strategies that account for opponents who combine living memory with undead persistence, creating enemies that cannot be broken by fear or demoralized by losses, but only destroyed through methods that sever whatever power animates their forms. The gates below swing open to admit Mance and his followers, their faces bearing the weathered hardness of people who have witnessed things that challenge understanding, while behind them stretch columns of refugees whose numbers speak to entire populations in motion, fleeing something that makes even the most warlike among them choose exile over resistance. The great hall of Winterfell fills with tension as thick as smoke when representatives of three peoples who have warred for generations gather around tables laden with maps showing territories that might soon become battlegrounds or graveyards, depending on decisions made in these crucial hours. Lord Commander Mormont arrives from Castle Black with rangers whose reports paint pictures of empty villages and forests stripped of all life. Their accounts supported by evidence that includes weapons broken in ways that suggest massive strength and tracks pressed into frozen ground by feet that leave no warmth in their wake. While Maester Luwin spreads correspondence from southern lords whose responses to requests for aid reveal the political calculations that govern their willingness to commit resources to northern concerns that seem distant from their immediate interests. The Night King seeks more than conquest. Mance explains to the assembled leaders, his weathered hands tracing routes across the map that show patterns of advance, suggesting strategic thinking rather than random predation. My people's shamans speak of ancient purposes, rituals that require specific numbers, specific bloodlines. He herds the living like a shepherd gathering sheep, but not for slaughter alone, for transformation. Bran's eyes roll back as vision claims him in the midst of discussion, his body going rigid as consciousness travels along paths that exist beyond normal perception, while those present wait in silence that stretches until he returns, with words that chill the air more effectively than any winter wind. He raises them where they die, the boy says in voice that carries echoes of something vast and ancient. but some he keeps alive, marching them north for purposes that serve rituals my sight cannot penetrate fully. The crypts beneath Winterfell, they call to him somehow. This revelation transforms debate from questions of military strategy to considerations that touch upon mysteries older than recorded history. For if the Night King seeks something specific beneath Winterfell, then defending the castle becomes more than preserving a stronghold, but protecting whatever lies buried in depths, where generations of Stark dead rest in stone tombs, watched over by carved direwolves, whose eyes seem to follow movement in darkness, illuminated only by torch flame that flickers with each draft that whispers through passages carved from living rock. Jon's mind calculates rapidly as he processes information that reshapes understanding of threats they face, realizing that traditional defensive strategies might prove inadequate against enemies whose goals transcend simple conquest to encompass purposes that require specific locations or artifacts that have rested undisturbed for centuries beneath northern soil. The dragonglass deposits Sam discovered in old texts become more than potential weapons, but strategic resources that must be secured before enemies claim them. While ravens bearing messages to Daenerys Targaryen across the Narrow Sea represent desperate attempts to forge alliances with powers whose aid might prove crucial when facing threats that require responses beyond conventional warfare. Tyrion's latest letter from King's Landing contains observations about political maneuvering in the capital that seems increasingly irrelevant compared to existential threats approaching from the north. Yet his words carry warnings about Cersei's growing paranoia and Stannis's continued claims to the Iron Throne that suggest southern conflicts will continue regardless of northern peril, forcing Jon to contemplate fighting wars on multiple fronts while coordinating defenses against enemies who neither tire nor require supplies, but only seek to add the living to their ranks through violence that serves purposes darker than any human ambition. The strategy that emerges from hours of discussion requires sacrifices that test every participant's commitment to cooperation over traditional loyalties. For success demands abandoning territories that hold deep cultural significance in favor of creating defensive positions where combined forces might hold long enough to discover weaknesses in enemies whose strengths seem to multiply with each victory they achieve. Maps spread across tables show withdrawal routes that lead refugee populations toward fortified positions while sacrificing lands that families have held for generations. Their abandonment representing calculations that weigh immediate losses against potential survival for remnants of civilization that might otherwise disappear entirely beneath advancing winter that brings darkness more complete than any season in living memory. Preparation begins immediately as ravens carry messages throughout the north, summoning every available sword, while blacksmiths work day and night, forging weapons from dragonglass that cuts through supernatural flesh more effectively than steel forged in normal fires. Their workshops glowing with heat that contrasts sharply with cold that deepens each day as winter tightens its grip on lands where snow no longer melts, but accumulates in drifts that obscure familiar landmarks and transform landscape into terrain that favors enemies whose forms require no warmth to function effectively in conditions that sap strength from living defenders who must maintain fires and seek shelter while their opponents advance without pause through storms that would stop human armies completely. The first refugees from beyond the wall begin arriving in numbers that strain resources already stretched thin by preparations for siege warfare that might last through winter, whose duration remains unknown. Their accounts of narrow escapes from pursuing Dad, providing intelligence about enemy capabilities, while their presence creates logistical challenges that require careful management to prevent conflict between populations whose historical enmities run deeper than immediate cooperation can easily bridge, forcing Jon to balance military necessity against political realities that threaten to undermine unity just when survival depends most completely on coordination between forces that have never fought as allies, but only as enemies, seeking advantage through violence that serves ambitions now rendered meaningless by threats that recognize no distinction between wildling and Northman, except their shared vulnerability to powers that hunt with patience that spans centuries and hunger that grows stronger with each soul added to armies that march without rest toward goals that remain hidden behind intelligence too alien for human understanding to penetrate completely. Bran's visions grow more frequent and more disturbing as the days pass, his consciousness traveling along threads of possibility that reveal multiple futures where different choices lead to outcomes ranging from narrow victory, purchased through sacrifices that hollow out civilization, to complete defeat that leaves nothing alive south of lands where ice never melts and darkness reigns eternal over territories stripped of all warmth and life. While his present sight sometimes catches glimpses of movement and shadows that should contain nothing more threatening than mice or drafts that stir tapestries hanging from walls where generations of Starks have planned wars against human enemies whose ambitions never threatened the fundamental nature of existence itself. The alliance between North, Night's Watch, and Free Folk takes shape through negotiations that require each party to surrender advantages they have maintained for generations in favor of cooperation that offers only the possibility of survival rather than guarantee of victory. Their success dependent on timing that must coordinate movements across vast distances while maintaining supply lines that stretch through territories where normal logistics become impossible. Once winter reaches depths that freeze rivers and bury roads beneath snow that accumulates faster than any force can clear, creating conditions where armies move slowly, if at all, while enemies advance without impediment through storms that would destroy any human formation caught in open terrain, without shelter that requires resources increasingly difficult to transport or maintain. Jon's letter to Daenerys carries words that balance honesty about desperate circumstances with appeals to ambitions that might motivate assistance from someone whose dragons represent power sufficient to challenge enemies that conventional weapons cannot touch effectively. While his correspondence with lords throughout Westeros attempts to communicate urgency about threats that seem abstract when viewed from southern castles, where summer still lingers and concerns focus on political maneuvering rather than existential survival. Their responses revealing how completely the realm remains divided, even as forces gather in the north that threaten not just particular kingdoms, but the continuation of human civilization in any form that preserves culture, knowledge, or hope for futures that extend beyond mere subsistence in world transformed by powers that serve purposes antithetical to every human aspiration that has driven progress through centuries of struggle toward goals that seem increasingly fragile when confronted by enemies whose strength grows with each victory they claim from settlements overrun despite defenses that seemed adequate when constructed against human opponents whose limitations allowed for strategic calculations that no longer apply when facing forces that require no rest, consume no provisions, and recognize no terrain as impassable during conditions that would force any living army to seek shelter or perish from exposure alone. The responses arrive sporadically, ravens struggling through weather that grows more violent with each passing day, their messages revealing divisions that run deeper than Jon anticipated when he assumed that existential threats would unite lords whose quarrels seemed petty when measured against annihilation itself. Tyrion's letter from Dragonstone carries careful phrases that acknowledge the gravity of Jon's warnings, while avoiding firm commitments that might bind Daenerys to courses of action her advisors consider premature. His words dancing around questions of legitimacy that have grown more complex since ravens began carrying whispered rumors about Jon's parentage that spread faster than official communications, creating political complications that intersect with military necessities in ways that transform every alliance into a careful balance of competing interests. Her Grace recognizes the wisdom in your counsel regarding northern defenses. Tyrion writes, though she observes that southern lords require evidence beyond testimony when committing forces to campaigns that extend beyond their traditional spheres of influence. The diplomacy masks harder questions about whether dragons should risk northern skies to protect kingdoms that have not yet acknowledged their queen, while Jon's claims to legitimacy create uncertainties about chains of command that could prove catastrophic during coordinated military operations. From King's Landing, Cersei's response arrives weeks later, her words dripping with skepticism that barely conceals calculations about opportunities that chaos might create for those prepared to exploit confusion, while others exhaust themselves fighting supernatural enemies. His Grace has received your warnings with appropriate concern, she writes through Grand Maester Qyburn, and has instructed the Gold Cloaks to increase patrols along the city's walls in preparation for refugees who may flee southward should your predictions prove accurate. The dismissive tone reveals how completely the Iron Throne misunderstands threats that cannot be defeated through traditional military preparations, while her offer to provide sanctuary for displaced nobility suggests plans that involve exploiting northern devastation rather than preventing it. More encouraging words arrive from Old Town, where Sam's connections within the Citadel have uncovered texts that confirm aspects of the threats Jon describes, though their academic language transforms urgent military intelligence into scholarly debates about historical precedents that provide knowledge without immediate tactical applications. The archives contain multiple references to similar phenomena, Sam writes, including detailed accounts of defensive strategies that proved effective during previous encounters, though the texts emphasize that success required coordination between multiple kingdoms and the application of resources that individual regions could not provide independently. The information proves valuable for long-term planning, while highlighting how completely current preparations fall short of requirements that ancient chronicles describe as minimal for survival against enemies whose capabilities exceed every contemporary military preparation. Sansa's ravens carry updates from Winterfell that chronicle preparations proceeding despite limitations that grow more severe with each storm. Her words balancing optimism about northern resilience with practical assessments of capabilities that shrink daily as supplies dwindle and weather conditions deteriorate beyond anything historical records contain. The small folk show remarkable determination. She writes, though their enthusiasm cannot replace weapons we lack or provisions that become more difficult to transport with each blocked road. Her reports detail innovations born from desperation that might provide temporary advantages, while acknowledging that creativity alone cannot overcome fundamental disadvantages in numbers, equipment, and environmental conditions that favor enemies whose strengths increase as temperatures drop. The strategic situation crystallizes during a meeting in Dragonstone's war room, where Jon spreads maps that show convergence points where multiple threats create overlapping dangers that require simultaneous responses across distances too great for coordinated command structures to manage effectively. Daenerys studies the positions with growing understanding of how completely this conflict differs from every previous campaign. Her questions revealing grasp of military realities that extend beyond simple applications of overwhelming force through dragon power that weather conditions may limit or neutralize entirely. Your enemies do not require supply lines, she observes, tracing routes along the map where traditional defensive positions become liabilities when attackers need neither rest nor provisions, while defenders must maintain complex logistical systems vulnerable to disruption at multiple points. Every advantage we possess depends on maintaining capabilities that grow more fragile as conditions worsen. Her analysis identifies the fundamental asymmetry that makes conventional strategic thinking inadequate for conflicts where environmental factors serve enemy purposes, while creating cumulative disadvantages for human forces that require increasingly scarce resources simply to survive in territories where their opponents grow stronger. Jorah suggests dividing available forces to create multiple defensive lines that might channel enemy movements toward prepared positions, though his proposal requires coordination between widely separated armies commanded by leaders whose political relationships remain uncertain despite shared threats that should transcend traditional rivalries. Layered defenses worked during the War of the Five Kings when we faced human opponents, he argues. But these enemies might simply overwhelm forward positions while we waste strength defending locations they can bypass without penalty. The discussion reveals how military experience becomes liability when applied to conflicts that violate fundamental assumptions about enemy behavior, logistics, and objectives that have guided strategic thinking throughout generations of warfare between human opponents. Tyrion raises questions about timing that highlight connections between political legitimacy and military effectiveness that cannot be separated during campaigns that require unprecedented cooperation between competing power centers. Lords who question your authority will hesitate to commit their full strength, he tells Jon, while delay allows your enemies to grow stronger and gives ambitious rivals opportunities to position themselves advantageously regardless of how this conflict resolves. The observation identifies cascading problems where political uncertainties create military vulnerabilities that increase exponentially as time passes without decisive action to establish clear command structures capable of managing resources efficiently across multiple theaters of operation. The revelation arrives through Sam's research rather than battlefield reconnaissance. His letter containing genealogical evidence that transforms every political calculation while creating new complications for alliances that depend on careful balances between competing claims to authority. The records are unambiguous, Sam writes from Old Town, though their implications extend beyond questions of succession to include prophecies that connect your lineage to capabilities that may prove essential during conflicts that conventional weapons cannot resolve. The documentation provides legal foundation for claims that reshape strategic possibilities while highlighting how personal identity intersects with military necessity in ways that create opportunities and vulnerabilities simultaneously. Jon reads the evidence while standing in Dragonstone's tower room, where maps spread across tables show enemy positions advancing despite defensive preparations that seemed adequate when planned, but prove insufficient when measured against capabilities that exceed every historical precedent. The convergence of personal revelation and strategic crisis, creating moments where individual decisions determine outcomes that affect not just kingdoms, but the survival of civilization itself. His thoughts turning toward alliances that require trust between former enemies whose cooperation may represent the only path toward victory, against forces that grow stronger with each settlement they consume, each defender they convert, each mile they advance through territories where winter deepens beyond anything recorded in chronicles that document conflicts between human opponents whose limitations no longer apply when facing enemies whose nature transcends the boundaries between life and death that once defined every battlefield calculation. The weight of Sam's revelation settles into Jon's understanding like snow accumulating on castle walls, each piece of evidence adding to a foundation that reshapes not just his identity, but the strategic landscape of the war itself. He folds the letter carefully, the parchment crackling in the silence of the tower room, where candlelight flickers across maps that suddenly seem inadequate for planning battles against enemies who recognize no limitations imposed by mortality or conventional warfare. The descent from Dragonstone's tower carries him through corridors where his footsteps echo against stone walls that have witnessed centuries of strategic deliberations, though none quite like the conversations that now occupy his thoughts. The main hall spreads before him like a chessboard, where pieces move according to rules that shift with each revelation about lineages and prophecies that connect personal identity to capabilities essential for victory against forces that grow stronger with each passing hour. Tyrion looks up from correspondence with southern lords whose pledges of support arrive alongside reports of settlements burned and populations converted to serve purposes that defy every tactical manual written by commanders who never faced enemies immune to steel and fire. The documentation from Old Town changes our assessment of available options, Tyrion observes, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone recalculating odds that seemed fixed only moments before. Legal claims matter less than practical capabilities when facing opponents who recognize neither law nor custom, though legitimacy provides foundations for alliances that require trust between parties whose cooperation represents our best hope for survival. The words hang in the air like smoke from the hearth, where logs burn with warmth that feels precious in a world where winter advances beyond seasonal patterns, documented in records that chronicle conflicts between human adversaries whose limitations no longer apply to current circumstances. Jon settles into the chair where so many strategic discussions have unfolded. The familiar weight of responsibility combining with new understanding about connections between personal history and military necessity that create opportunities alongside vulnerabilities. The letter from Sam rests on the table between maps that show enemy positions advancing despite defensive preparations that seemed adequate when conventional warfare defined the scope of possible conflict. Daenerys enters the hall with Jorah at her side, their faces reflecting the gravity of intelligence reports that arrive from scouts, whose survival depends on speed rather than stealth when monitoring forces that detect living presence through methods that bypass every technique taught by masters of reconnaissance. The dragons respond differently since the revelations about your parentage became clear, she says, her words carrying implications that extend beyond questions of bloodline to include tactical considerations about creatures whose cooperation may prove essential for victory against enemies who grow stronger with each defender they corrupt, each settlement they claim, each mile they advance through territories where conventional weapons prove inadequate against opponents whose nature transcends limitations imposed by mortality. The conversation develops through careful exploration of possibilities that require trust between former rivals whose alliance represents the convergence of personal bonds and strategic necessity in ways that create opportunities for victory against forces that seemed insurmountable when faced individually. The war council that follows brings together voices from across Westeros, their diverse perspectives creating symphony of strategic thinking that adapts to circumstances no previous generation ever confronted. Ser Davos speaks from experience gained through decades of service to kings whose ambitions operated within boundaries defined by human limitations. His observations about supply lines and defensive positions carrying wisdom that applies even when facing enemies whose capabilities transcend conventional military analysis. The Night King's advance continues despite resistance efforts that succeed in slowing rather than stopping progress toward population centers where millions of lives depend on decisions made by leaders whose cooperation requires setting aside generations of accumulated grievances and territorial disputes. Reports arrive throughout the evening from commanders whose messages carry urgency that increases with each passing hour. Their words describing battles where courage and skill matter less than unity between forces, whose combination creates strength beyond the sum of individual contributions. The strategies that emerge from these discussions reflect hard-won understanding about conflicts where personal relationships determine outcomes that affect not just kingdoms, but the survival of civilization itself. The integration of political alliances and military tactics, creating framework for resistance that adapts to enemies whose nature requires responses that extend beyond conventional approaches to warfare and diplomacy. As dawn approached over Dragonstone, Jon found himself standing alone upon the battlements, watching the first rays of sunlight spread across a world that had endured darkness beyond anything recorded in the histories of men. The war against the dead had reshaped every kingdom in Westeros. Ancient rivalries had been set aside. Old grudges had been buried beneath the greater necessity of survival. The cost had been terrible, yet life endured where once only extinction seemed possible. For a long time, Jon watched the sea below and reflected on the strange path that had carried him to this moment. There had been a time when he believed his future lay at the Wall, a time when he dreamed of joining the Night's Watch, of earning honor among sworn brothers and finding purpose beyond the limitations of his birth. Yet fate had carried him elsewhere. He had never taken the Black. He had never stood watch atop the Wall as another version of himself might have done. Instead, he had walked a different road, one that led through courts and councils, through alliances and revelations, through discoveries about his own blood that changed not only his future, but the future of the realm itself. Looking back, Jon understood that destiny rarely arrives in the form people expect. Sometimes the path denied to us is not a tragedy. Sometimes it is merely the beginning of another journey. The boy who once searched for a place to belong had become a man capable of helping unite kingdoms that had spent centuries divided by ambition, pride, and fear. As the sun climbed higher above the narrow sea, its light spreading across a realm finally moving toward peace, Jon allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The future remained uncertain. It always would, but for the first time in many years, uncertainty no longer felt like a threat. It felt like hope. And as a new age began across Westeros, one truth remained undeniable. Jon Snow had never joined the Night's Watch, and because of that, the history of the Seven Kingdoms had been forever changed.